Hi, I'm Dr. Michelle Pedicola of Secrets of Life and Death. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. Secrets of Life and Death. Because 2 days ago, I hit my 70th birthday. It only happens once every 10 years that you hit that decade mark. And it's almost like you start a whole new chapter in your life. And I don't know what I'm going to be like in the decade after this one. How will I be when I'm 80? My mother was already dead at the age of 77. And my father, he had Alzheimer's when he was 80. Now, of course, I've been doing a lot of things to take care of myself, to take care of this body, which reminds me of something that my yoga teacher said. He said, you are a spiritual being having a human adventure. So you don't take it too seriously. You don't get too caught up in your successes and failures, that you step back a little bit and say, oh, this is an adventure. Don't take it too seriously. And my Sufi teacher said, when asked the meaning of life, he said, well, you could fly a kite. However, I'm inviting you to take life a little more seriously, or to recognize that, yes, you are having a human adventure, and part of having that human adventure is residing in these human bodies. And these bodies have their own agenda. And one of those agendas is meaning. Human beings need meaning to feel fulfilled, to feel satisfied. I was talking to a woman today, and she had lost her husband about 5 years ago, and she hasn't been able to put her life back together again because she can't create any meaning around her husband's death. We need to have meaning. I would invite her to carry on the meaning that her husband brought into her life by moving forward and completing what they had envisioned together. And that maybe the whole point was for her to step up and do that without him. Now that's hard, and that sounds maybe a little bit heartless on my part, but it isn't heartless. We are here having a human adventure. And part of that human adventure is that things are going to change, and that you cannot count on anything. You cannot count on the love of your life being there. Hi, thank you for joining. We're talking about secrets of life and death. So the number one secret of death is it's not a punishment. Death is actually a reward for having a good life. That you finally get a free pass and get to go past go without having to go around the board, that you're done. Well, there's a concept, isn't it? But if you think of death as being enveloped in the most cosmic love, the most huge feeling of love and acceptance that you've ever known, that sounds pretty good. Now, of course, I'm not inviting you to go off and knock yourself off, but don't think about death as punishment. It's actually, hi, thank you for joining. I'm talking about secrets of life and death. It's been my passion for 20 more years, 22 more years, something like that. I've lost track. Anyway, what I'm talking about is, first, the secret of death is that it's not a punishment, it's actually a reward. And the secret of life is meaning. Human beings need meaning. We're actually wired to need meaning. And when we don't have a purpose, we actually start to die. We are made up of billions of cells. And did you know that every one of those cells actually has a program that will shut itself down, that will literally shut that cell down if it doesn't have a purpose. I bring that up to you because it wasn't too long ago that I saw my in-laws, my mother and father-in-law, die in a senior care home. Basically, they died of boredom. They lost their meaning. They lost their purpose. They were warehoused. And unfortunately, we do that with a lot of our seniors. And I'm concerned about that because I'm moving into those senior years myself. What I'm doing, however, is living my life as fully as I can, because I intend to live until I die, to live purposefully. That is my intention, is live fully until I die. So how do you do that? Well, you live your brilliance. You share your gifts. You are of service. These are all human requirements. So the number one secret of living this life fully is to acknowledge that you're living in human bodies and they have their own agenda. Bodies have their own agenda. And unlike other animals, this particular human body needs meaning. It needs to have a purpose. It needs to feel fulfilled. And when it doesn't have a purpose, when it doesn't feel fulfilled, it starts to die. A few years back, I went to my 50th high school reunion. And it was interesting to see how many people had aged. And what I noticed was there was a correlation between those who had retired, what a term, retired, I'm going to talk about that in a minute, those who had retired and those that were still actively involved in life, that still had a purpose, still had a mission. Now you can say, well, retirement's a time for relaxing, time for play and having fun. Well, that's great, but it only goes so far, and then it gets boring, because how many different ways can you stimulate this body and excite it? After a while, it gets to be a game. Well, what haven't I done yet? What can I try next? And you just sort of chase after that sensation, that activation, which is really an activation of the sympathetic nervous system. Here's the real secret. When you activate the sympathetic nervous system, which is the excitation system, which makes you feel glorious and excited, like, you just got $1 million and you feel fabulous. However, it's the same system that can also activate anger and grief and misery and despair. And so it's just, hi, thank you for joining, talking about the secrets of life and death. So I'm talking about having a purpose as being part of the secret of life. That if you have meaning, then you feel good. These bodies are actually wired to be of service to other people. And when we aren't of service, we lose track of why we're here. What is the meaning? Why am I here? And if you don't have meaning or you don't have purpose, you could die. You could waste away. You could lose your faculties. Because what you exercise in these bodies, whether it's a muscle or it's the neural nets in your brain, what you exercise gets stronger. And what you don't exercise gets weaker. And that's what happened to my in-laws. They were put in a home where most of the people, hi, thanks for joining, Secrets of Life and Death. So my in-laws were put in a senior home with people who were either had dementia or were catatonic or were unsociable. And they died of boredom. Literally died of boredom. These bodies can die of boredom. It's like when you no longer have meaning, when you no longer have purpose, when you're no longer exercising those parts of your life that make you feel like you are worthwhile, you can die. This is, of course, very, very important to me, and important to that whole 60s generation, that the baby boomers who are moving towards their own old age. How can they continue to have meaning in their lives? How can they continue to contribute? So maybe you have amassed enough money to retire. I would invite you to change the word retire to the word repurpose. Repurpose. What's your purpose now? So you've earned enough money to get a free pass, to do whatever you want, and find out what that is. And so maybe for the first couple of years, you will do exactly what you want. And then you will decide, how are you going to spend your life? I can't begin to tell you of how many people who have retired who very soon afterwards develop some kind of, develop some kind of illness, life-threatening illness, and even die within months of retiring. What a word. Forget retire. It's time to repurpose. If you have worked at a job that you don't particularly like or love, and you have done it in order to have a comfortable retirement, don't retire, repurpose. Figure out what it is that you really want to do. What have you been holding back on? I remember there was a story that was told about a man who was following this prosperity consciousness course. He was an attorney, and one of the ideas of this prosperity consciousness was to save enough money to take a whole year off, to find out what it is that you really love to do. He decided this was such a good idea. He decided to take all of his money out of savings and to literally borrow money from his friends so that he had enough to live on for a whole year. And the first weeks, months, sat out around on the couch, he read books, he relaxed, he took walks. And then maybe the second month, he started going over to his law firm. He was only taking a year off, right? He was on sabbatical. And he started coming in. He says, what's going on? And he started paying attention to what was there. And he saw some cases that he was interested in. And he said, oh, could I work on that? And he started working on the cases, the projects that he enjoyed. And by the end of the year, thank you for joining. By the end of the year, he actually made more money in that year than in any of his previous years. So that says a lot about doing what it is that you really love to do. Don't retire, repurpose, and find out what it is that you love to do. But don't try figuring it out through thinking about it. Thinking about it is just a waste of brain power. Do. Be a doer. Go out and do something. See what it feels like. Try it out. Do you enjoy it? Maybe you will develop a cause that you want to live or contribute to. There are just tons of opportunities out there to make a difference in the world, to help young women in Africa or in India, or to contribute to a worthy cause, or to volunteer for hospice. I've been volunteering and being part of Toastmasters, which is an amazing way of sharing your vision and your voice and influencing other people. And that's the way to create meaning in your life. Now, if you're younger, and you're saying, well, I've got a long time yet, it's never too soon to ask, well, what do I really want to do? For the first 49 years of my life, I guess it was 48 years of my life, I was living a life of pleasing others. It was a habit I developed when I was 2 years old. And unfortunately, it's a habit that is really rewarded in this culture. And once it gets set in after like 20 years, it's hard to break because you get addicted to the approval that you receive from pleasing others. The problem with pleasing others, it's probably one of the most pernicious of all the behavior patterns and habits because it's so encouraged by this culture. The problem is that hi, thank you for joining. The problem with being a people pleaser is that you can lose your way. You lose track of what your purpose is. You lose track of what it is that you love to do. And you don't really share your brilliance, your gifts. You learn very early on in life that it isn't okay to be yourself, and you become something other than yourself. And what I have found about people pleasers is not only, in my own experience, do you not live your full purpose, do you not stand in your power, but it also affects your relationships. So part of my experience was losing my first husband. He left me for another woman. I don't blame him. I was not a particularly heart-opened person at that time. We were a perfect match for a long time until he had a life crisis. I guess it was a midlife crisis. He was in his 40s and he decided that he wanted more in life. I don't know that he ever got it, but you know what? It was perfect for me because it helped me to wake up. Now, my first response upon losing him, and here my heart goes out to all of you who have gone through losses, because losses are difficult, but for me, it was a wake-up call. Now, my first response was to join a spiritual community where relationships don't matter. And it was really very effective in that way. I didn't worry about being in a relationship. And the only relationship that mattered was with the divine. I didn't have to worry about work either, which I had been struggling with as well, because although it's easy to please people in school, it becomes harder to please people as an adult, especially if your agenda is to please everyone, which was my agenda. Didn't even think about what it was that I loved to do. Anyway, I stayed with this. Actually, I'm still with this spiritual community, but I focused on this for many, many years. And it's interesting. I transferred all my desire to please over to my Sufi teacher, my spiritual teacher. But he was a wise old man. He was pretty smart. And so no matter how much I gave, he never gave me the approval that I longed for. And one of the things that I wanted to be was a dancer. He had all these women, gorgeous women, who were dancers. And I could never quite make the grade. And one day, he invited me to go to an event, and this was in New York City, and I was supposed to dance. I got dressed up in my belly dance costume, and he wanted me to videotape it. So I was the videographer. I was out there, but he promised me that somebody would eventually relieve me and let me come on stage. And I was out there for an hour and a half in a cold auditorium videotaping all the other dancers. And then finally, after everybody had danced and they were dancing again, he finally sends somebody out and I go up there, but I'm in tears and I can't dance. I get up there and I flap around and I was crushed. I was crushed because here I had been wanting to be one of the dancers. It was an awakening because after that I decided that I would only dance because I love to dance. I was no longer going to dance for the approval of my teacher. And that was really empowering. That was my first step towards empowerment. Now, the second step towards empowerment was that I met the love of my life. Well, the second love of my life, my second husband, and he came along and I fell in love, and I quickly realized that I had these issues of abandonment. My whole people pleasing came from being abandoned by my father. He didn't disappear. He didn't die. He came back. But by the time he did, I had given up on him and had turned into a people pleaser. So I realized that I had this fear. Okay, he abandoned me when I was 2 years old. And the first 3 years of your life are really, really critical. The neural nets in your brain, the way in which you think about yourself. Hi, thank you for joining. I'm talking about the lessons I've learned over the course of my years. My birthday was just 2 days ago, and I'm sharing some of my insights about how to live your life. Hey, this may be my legacy, right? So I was talking about how I discovered that I mattered, that what I wanted mattered, because up until this point in my life, I was pleasing everybody else. And by the way, it's a really common habit. It's a common behavior, pleasing or controlling, that we somehow take care of ourselves and manipulate the world to give us the love we need through pleasing or controlling. Pleasing is, as I said, somewhat pernicious because it can be very successful. Anyway, I realized that if I didn't do something about my abandonment fears and my pleasing, that I was going to lose this new relationship, this guy that I really liked a lot. Actually an upgrade from my first husband, although I didn't know it completely at that time. So I went and I did some early childhood healing. And just as I finished that early childhood healing, my parents began to die. First my father from Alzheimer's, and then my mother. Her breast cancer returned. Now, I had bonded with my father and then had broken with him. I had never bonded with my mother. And I came back to help her finish up business. My father had died. She had cancer. She had gone off of her chemo and was just getting ready to die. And I went to help her. She had been a toy designer. And we were sitting in her studio. She actually was pretty successful being a housewife and getting involved with my aunt as a partner and going into New York and selling their designs to major toy companies. I was not impressed. I was the child who felt abandoned and neglected, so I wasn't really impressed. But anyway, we're sitting in her studio and I'm going through some of her papers, and I look at one and it's one of her designs. And I say, "Do you need this anymore?" I hand it to her. And she looks at it and she says, "Oh, I guess I'll never get to this. I'll never finish this project." Her words pierced my heart. I mean, this was a woman who was the poster child of living her purpose, her life, living on purpose. And she had regrets. And I took the paper back because my feelings were newly online. I had just done this major healing, and the feelings were welling up in me, all these confusion of feelings, and I was scared. So I took the paper back and I said, "We don't need to deal with this right now." So instead of holding space for her, instead of allowing her to face her death, allowing her to face her regret, I ran away. I shut her down. And that moment of intimacy that I had craved with my mother all my life, was lost forever. She died 2 weeks later. Her moment of regret became my moment of regret. And it catalyzed me. It woke me up. In that moment, I realized that I did not want to live my life with regret. I was going to live my life on purpose. Now, the first thing I decided to do was to make a documentary about death, because I thought, wow, this is pretty impressive. I mean, it activated all these emotions, and it woke me up. It woke me up to what it means to really live life. I had not been living my life for 48 years. I had been living a life that I thought other people wanted me to live. This is the secret. Live who you truly are. The number one regret of the dying, according to best-selling author Bronnie Ware from Australia, hospice nurse, is, I wish I had had the courage to live a life true to myself. So that's the number one secret. Live your passion. Share your brilliance. Now, there are things that get in the way of that. Emotional wounds from childhood. Habits like being a people pleaser. It's, as I said, it's a pernicious habit. It's not easy to let go because we get addicted to the appreciation. And the appreciation literally stimulates chemical release in your body that makes you feel good, worthwhile, happy. And when you break that habit, you can actually go through withdrawal. It's true. So how do you do that? Well, personally, I have found in my own experience as a psychosomatic, social, psychological therapist, PhD, that you need help, that you can't do it alone, that you need support and guidance from somebody else. Otherwise, you're going to be listening to the inner child that got hurt, and she's going to tell you no. And you're going to be listening to this body, which does not like to be rejected, because the body actually is wired to bond with other people. And it will say, no, don't risk it. It's only spirit that's going to tell you to move forward. And I actually did spiritual work for 13 years before my parents died. And I woke up. Now, I believe that that provided me with the grounding and the upliftment and the separation of consciousness from other people that allowed me to change. But that was only the start. That was only the beginning. I have been on a long journey. But that's what my yoga teacher said. We are spiritual beings having a human adventure. So I'm going to share another quote with you that I really particularly like. It's from Marianne Williamson, thought leader. And she said, our deepest fear is not that we're inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. Take that in. That's another secret of life. Each one of us is important in the scheme of things. And each one of us, as we become more authentic, as we become more truly ourselves, as we share our gifts, we help to transform this planet. Yeah, right now, things are kind of messy, aren't they, out there? We've got this crazy flu that's coming out of China. We have a government, and I don't care which side you're on, that is not listening to our needs. We have global or climate chaos. We have huge loss of species. And we have a lowering of life standard for the middle class. And that's just in the United States. I don't even want to talk about the rest of the world. And it's up to us to make the difference. The good news is that you can make a difference. You can make a real difference by living true to yourself, by being your authentic self. So how do you go about doing that? Well, sometimes it's really hard to even know what that is. Sometimes you're just going to listen to what you've been taught. The voice inside of you that says, stay safe. do what you're, why do I have to do something big? Well, you have to only do as big as your spirit requires. If you don't, this is what I've also found, if you don't live your passion, it's going to impact you in your health or your wealth or your love. Impact your health? Take this statistic. 1 out of 6 Americans is on some kind of psychiatric drug, primarily antidepressants and tranquilizers. And that doesn't even begin to measure all the people who are self-medicating through drinking and drugs and overeating and texting and TV and workaholism. That's another one of those pernicious drugs, those addictions, those pernicious addictions. Workaholism, just like people pleasing. People love it if you work hard, don't they? And you are reinforced for it. And it can kill your body. It can wear you out. And then because you don't want to look at or feel your emotions, and of course in this culture we are really encouraged not to feel our emotions because they get in the way of your productivity, then they get trapped in your body. And that also leads to illness. All that eating, all that, sugar addiction is all fed by that ennui, that feeling of not being on purpose, of being dissatisfied. And all the time your brilliance, your spirit is saying, hey, wake up, you better wake up. You're running out of time. So I'm here today to remind you that life is too short not to be living on purpose. And if you're struggling with what that is, or you're struggling with, hi, thank you for joining me, Secrets of Life and Death is the subject. So if you're struggling to share your gifts, to open your voice, to make a difference in the world, if you're being held back by other people coming first, or by feeling like there isn't enough time, or there's not enough money, or somebody else comes first, let's have a conversation. In the comments section, I have a link to my scheduler, and you can have a 15-minute conversation with me if this resonates with you. If you are tired of living a life of quiet desperation, if you're tired of not living true to yourself, let's have a conversation to find out what's blocking you, what's holding you back from sharing your gifts, from living your mission. So I have a client who came to me because she was grieving the loss of her mother. But she kept on staying with me and kept on working with me. And she actually started moving back into her life. Up until that point, she was health challenged. She was staying at home. She was not going out. She was handicapped. And after working with me, she got reconnected with a senior community. And she started teaching writing classes. And she started taking actions that helped her to step into her power. And now her husband, who helps people heal cancer through alternative methods, has invited her to be part of his practice as a healer and to help people to change their mindset. Mindset is so huge. We create so much of what we experience in the world. Yes, you can change. And what's interesting is she actually looks younger now than she did when I started with her. Because when you have a purpose, when you have a meaning, when you feel valued, your cells reflect that. Your cells actually get younger. It's actually a part of the way in which you think about yourself. So take me, for example. I have actually gotten younger since I turned 60 10 years ago. Every year I actually get more excited and more activated and more engaged in life. That's the true secret of life, is engagement, is living full on, living and sharing your gifts, because we are social creatures. We are connected with each other, and when we do good for other people, we feel good about ourselves. So what are you going to do? Are you going to live your life on purpose? Are you ready to make a difference? Are you ready to share your brilliance? That's it for today. Bye.